Hello, Mr. Dowse here, and in this video we're going to look at project planning tools and software. So let's make a start, and this video hopefully for most of you will be a little bit of revision on things that we've done in the past, but I would still like you to have a go at this whether you've done it before or not, making sure that you take notes on the video in your e-portfolios and then you do the tasks that I set as we go through. So hopefully everybody recognises this as a Gantt chart. There are a couple of extra things that we would need to recognise on a Gantt chart that we can't necessarily see on this one, but we should recognise the layout and we should know that it's a Gantt chart, and we should know that a Gantt chart is a graphical way of planning and ordering the tasks that we have to do. It shows how long each task should take, and it shows the relationships between the tasks, as in some tasks need to be completed before another can be started. It allows you to specify the resources you will need, and you should also then be able to calculate how long the project's going to take. So let's take an example of tasks that could run concurrently maybe. So if you are in the process of decorating a wall, well, you could take out the furniture at the same time as you're taking down the displays off the wall. That could happen at the same time if you've got more than one person working on that job. However, if you were going to put a new carpet in, it's unlikely that you'd want the walls painted and the ceiling painted once that new carpet's in place. So painting the room and painting the ceiling is something that should be done before the new carpet is put in. And certainly all of the old furniture would need to be out of the room before you could lay the new carpet. So some of those jobs can run concurrently at the same time, and some of those jobs have to happen one after the other. So when we're talking about a Gantt chart, we can see the dates along the top, we can see the jobs going down on the left. Here you can see that we've got job 1 as a main category, and then we can see the sub-jobs that belong to job 1 underneath it. Then we get to job 2 and the sub-jobs that belong to job 2 underneath that. We can see here that this job finishes before this job starts. Now that could be because it's critical that this finishes before that starts, or it could be that we just don't have enough staff in order to do both of these tasks at the same time. Here, however, you can see that this job has started, and while that job is still going on, this job here also begins. So this could be something that could happen concurrently, naturally, or it could just be that we have enough staff to cope and we can allow ourselves to do two things at once. Things that we should also recognise on a Gantt chart are contingency time, normally denoted by a horizontal line through our Gantt chart. Here this is showing today, so this is really showing us what's been and what's to come. It's not really a contingency. As I say, the contingency is normally shaded, and a contingency is just a little bit of extra time that's left in at the end that ideally you don't want to use, but you've added in just in case there are some delays. Let's say you're waiting on suppliers and it's a possibility that could run late. You don't want your whole Gantt chart to be ruined by one supplier delivering parts late, so you add in a little bit of contingency time. Something else that you might like to see, or what you should recognise if you do see, is a diamond shape on your Gantt chart, and that's classed as a milestone. And a milestone is something that has to happen before something else can start. So as we just talked about, if you want to fit a new carpet into a room, well, you'll need to take out all of the old furniture before you do, and that would be a milestone. There's no point getting the carpet fitters in if the room's still full of furniture. So they would have to get the furniture cleared. That's your milestone, and then afterwards the people come in to fit the carpet. It doesn't matter how many staff you've got, you could do it quicker, but one has to finish before the next one starts. So that's how we recognise a Gantt chart, and that's what Gantt charts are for. So the next thing, this hopefully you recognise as a PERT chart. Okay, so a PERT chart, or Program Evaluation and Review Technique chart, PERT chart, Program Evaluation Review and Review Technique chart, provides a graph of the timeline for a project. It takes the fixed end date for your project and then calculates backwards. So unlike a Gantt chart where you start at the beginning and you work to the end, a PERT chart works in reverse. We find the end date when the project's got to be delivered by, and we work backwards to see where we need to start. So it takes into account any changes that occur in a project schedule that would affect the finish, okay, the finish time. It uses the nodes shown as the circles. Now the nodes represent milestones to be achieved during the project, whereas the arrows themselves represent the tasks. So this is a little bit different again from the Gantt chart. These are milestones, but these are the tasks. So the arrows represent the tasks. Now obviously this hasn't got any detail on it, and normally there would need to be detail, but what we know here is that A is a milestone, so something had to have been achieved before this task and this task could start, because as we know, a milestone is something fixed and the next bit can't happen until that happens. So it also shows which tasks depend on another. So the arrow going from node A to node B means that A must be achieved before B can be started. Okay, they're milestones, so A must be achieved before B can be started. And we can also see parallel tasks. So here we can see that once we've achieved milestone A, this task and this task, which will get us to milestone B and C, will run concurrently. Okay, so they're concurrent tasks. That's the way it's been drawn. So that's how a PERT chart works. Let's have a look up here. Activity A, duration is 3, whatever, doesn't depend on anything. B has a duration of 4, but it depends on A being finished. C has a duration of 5, it also depends on A being finished. D, well, that has a duration of 3, and it requires that B is finished, which, as we already know, requires A to be finished. And then finally we've got milestone E, also a duration of 4, but E requires both B and C to be finished before it can be completed, and this again are two parallel tasks that will run to reach our milestone E. So if we see one of these charts, this is a PERT chart, a program evaluation and review technique chart. We need to understand what the activities are, which will be explained to us. We need to understand what the durations are, how long these things will take to do, and we need to know what the dependencies are. What's important really to remember is that the nodes, or the circles, they represent milestones, and it's the arrows that represent the tasks in this instance. Okay, we're now going to look at critical path. Okay, we bring up the path, the title even. So critical path analysis for making lunch. So relatively easy to start with. We just put some water and eggs into a pan. We wait for the eggs to cook. We put the eggs and toast on a plate and we eat our lunch. However, there's a little bit more to it than that. So let's have a look at what a critical path is, and then we'll talk about the other bits. So the critical path helps you to work out how long it will take to complete each task. If you have a lot of tasks, it may be difficult to know which is the most important or critical. This means that if this task is held up, it will affect the whole project. So we're looking for the critical tasks within our project, the things that must be done, otherwise our project will get held up overall. It also identifies where we might have something called slack. That means that if one task is quite short, it may have people and resources allocated to it that are doing nothing, and they could be busy doing another task in order for the project to finish sooner. So the critical path is designed to find slack in our projects and therefore better resource our projects to make them finish quicker. So here we've got a critical path for making lunch, and we need to cook some eggs. Okay, we need to put some water and eggs into a pan. We need to wait for the eggs to cook. We need to put the eggs and toast onto a plate. We need to eat lunch. But we haven't made any toast, so we've also got to cut a slice of bread, wait for the bread to toast, and butter your toast. And what you're seeing here is some slack. While you're waiting for the eggs to be cooked, well, this is a good time to cut a slice of bread, put the bread in the toaster, and then butter your toast. You can do that while the eggs are cooking, and then when the eggs have cooked, you can put the eggs onto the toast and onto the plate, and we can eat lunch. However, there's actually more slack in this scenario, because here we're waiting for the eggs to cook, and while we're waiting for the eggs to cook, we cut a slice of bread and we put it in the toaster. And again, this is an area where we've noted some slack, because we just stood waiting for the toast to toast while we stood waiting for the eggs to cook. So while we're doing that, we can fill the kettle, and we can wait for the kettle to boil, and we can make a cup of tea. And again, what we notice is there's some slack. While we're waiting for the eggs to cook, we're waiting for the bread to toast, and we're waiting for the kettle to boil. So it is possible that during that time we could even be doing something extra during this time, because there will be still a little bit of slack in this critical path. So the critical path helps us to work out what the important stages are, what the critical parts of our project are, and also help us to identify where we could have workers that are doing nothing because they're waiting for something else to happen, and we can put them to better use and make use of our resources. So that's a critical path. And again, just very briefly, the time is shown down the bottom here clearly with the red line. So our next pre-production document is a visualization diagram. And a visualization diagram is designed to give you an idea of what's happening in terms of pictures. So here's an example of a flower being watered, and you can see over the course of 7 days it's going to grow from a small flower into a big flower. That's pretty simplistic, but that's the basic idea. You create a picture which describes a process and gives someone an idea of what you mean. And sometimes that's clearer and easier, especially if it's a media style task like creating a image for a publication or creating a video, to have a visual style document than a written one like we've seen previously. The final type of pre-production document I'd like to show you is a flowchart. And again, I'm hoping that you've seen something like this before. There is some important notation that we need to know. Let's just see if I can get that process to appear. I'm just going to go forward a slide. No, I can't. You're going to have to take my word for this one. So the first symbol is an oval. We always start with an oval and we always end with an oval. It's really, really important that we only have one start and one end. You will see some flowcharts drawn with more than one start and one end, and that's badly drawn. You really shouldn't have that. We then have arrows that go between the tasks, and they connect the different shapes to show relationships. If you see this one, a parallelogram, which is a rectangle that's just pushed over to the side very slightly, well, that represents an input or an output. So it's getting information from someone or outputting information to someone, like asking a question before we can move on in our flowchart. A process is a rectangle. We're missing the shape there, unfortunately, but it is a rectangle which says we're going to do something. Okay. Then we have a diamond shape, and this represents a decision. And generally there are two outputs from a diamond. We have a yes and a no. One will go down and one will go out from the side, depending on what the decision is. Just bear with me 1 second. Apologies for that untimely delay there, I couldn't find what I was looking for. But here's an example of a flowchart for making a cup of tea. So we've got a rectangle. You'll have to excuse the fact that there's no start and there's no end. This was a snapshot that I did with another year group, but obviously we'd have a start here and we would have boil the kettle, add the tea bag to the cup. So we're missing a couple of processes, but this is just a snapshot. And then we get, and you can see the directional flow, you can see our arrows that join up the shapes. Here we get to our first decision. Do we want milk in our cup of tea? Well, if we don't, we follow the no path and we come straight down to here. But if we do, we go across on the yes path, we add milk, and then we rejoin the flow. It's quite important that the arrow rejoins the flow and not another node. Having worked out whether or not we need milk, we go on to say, do we want sugar? Again, if we want sugar, we come off on a branch, we add sugar, and then we rejoin the logical flow. If you don't want sugar, well, then we don't put any in, and the next thing we do is we remove the tea bag. You can see really that we've missed the option to pour in boiling water and then to let it brew and then come to an end, but you get the idea of how a decision should look. If we have a look at this one, this is a slightly more complicated one, but it shows how multiple different things can connect together. So here we have a flowchart for can we see in the dark and what can we do about it. So we start here, we end here, we've got one start and stop. First thing I'm asked is can I see in the dark? If I say yes, I follow this path, I come down here and I go straight to stop because I don't need to do anything because I can see in the dark. No, if you can't see in the dark, well then you come down here. And we check the lamp connection. That's just a process, that's something we do. Then we say, is the lamp connected? No, the lamp is not connected. So we connect the lamp, we come to an end. The lamp is already connected. Well, obviously we've got no light. So now we need to know, is the bulb broken? Well, if the bulb is broken, we replace the bulb and then we come to the end because we can turn on our light. If the bulb isn't broken, we say, is the lamp broken? And if the lamp is broken, we say repair. Now I ran out of room, but if the lamp wasn't broken, we could just say switch on the light and come to an end. So you see how these things link together in a flowchart. So let's go back to where we were. Oops, swap that round. So here are our shapes, and you understand and you can see how our flowchart is meant to work and how we're going to use that later on to produce some visual representation and visual solution to a problem. Finally, we look at mind maps. Okay, we should all really know what a mind map is by now, but we start normally with a single concept and we create a diagram that shows relationships between each part of the concept. So here, as an example, we've got the concept, the central concept, the most important thing is potatoes, and then we're going to look at ways that we can cook them. So we've got 4 main nodes. We've got baked, fried, mashed and garlic, and then from each of these nodes or branches we go on to sub branches and leaves. So fried, need fat to fry, which is fattening. We need a frying pan, it'll take 10 minutes. We need to clean the pan after. If we have chips, we can go to the chip shop, but we need to dry there. We could buy fish as well, that's expensive. If we're having mash, we need a masher. We're going to need some additives, we're going to need milk, butter, salt and pepper, and so on and so forth. So you can see how you would start to break down problems in a mind map. So here are some advantages and disadvantages of each. I'm going to assume that you can read through this on your own, so I won't go through the whole thing, but it is important that you recognize each of these different types of pre-production document and you know the advantages and disadvantages of each. So you need to be making a note of these, or at the very least taking a snip and popping it into your e-portfolio. So at this stage, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the tasks. Okay, so there are 3 tasks associated with this week's work. The first one is I want you to create a critical path analysis, not for making lunch this time, but for cleaning up after lunch. So you've created bread and butter, you've created some scrambled eggs and you put that on your bread and butter, you've made a cup of tea, and you've eaten your lunch. So I want you to put together a critical path analysis for how you're going to go about tidying up. One thing that I'm going to insist on is that you load the dishwasher, you put the dishwasher on for an economy setting of 30 minutes, and that you take all of the clean pots back out of the dishwasher and put them away. So your job then is to think about all the things involved in tidying up after yourself, what you would need to do, and to identify where there may be some slack in that scenario and design your diagram to look like this, identifying slack. And slack goes underneath an area where you've identified the slack. So that's task 1. Task 2 also links back to our critical path analysis of waiting to cook eggs. But what I would like you to do this time is I would like you to produce these nodes and critical path nodes into a flowchart. So let me just bring our flowchart back in that we looked at earlier, and I'm going to want you, using a flowchart, using the things that we've talked about, ovals for start and end, rectangles for processes, diamonds for questions, and just off-center rectangles, trapeziums for our inputs and outputs. And I would like you to create a flowchart that looks like that, but for this critical path analysis of making our lunch and cooking our toast and making ourselves a cup of tea. So you're going to produce a flowchart to satisfy that task. The final task is to create a mind map. Okay, and I'd like you to create a mind map, but I want you to go back to the scenario from last week. Remember, the scenario was a small shop selling computer peripherals such as printers, scanners and external storage. They've got 3 employees, a sales assistant, a person in charge of ordering and maintaining stock, and then a manager. And they're looking to improve the time spent by each customer by 50%, and making sure that all stock is available and they can identify the customer on a new computer system. So I'll leave that as a document for you to look at, so you've got all the details, but your job will be to create a mind map of everything you can think of that would be relevant to that scenario. So we've got 3 things to do. We've got a critical path to produce, we've got a flow diagram to produce, and we've got a mind map to produce. And that's it for this week. Thanks very much for watching.